Hello, everyone. Welcome to Unjourneying. I am your host, Mira Funk, licensed clinical social worker. So, I haven't actually recorded on this channel in a long time. It's been a couple years. I've been very deeply immersed in the clinical work, but I felt inspired to create a new episode here. And I want to give a little bit of backstory about how that happened. So, I advertised in a signal group related to psychedelics that I was going to do a presentation about 5-MeO DMT and especially about the offerings that I have in that space. And the presentation was intended for prospective clients, but what I found as a pleasant surprise was that most of the people who attended were actually other clinicians and servers and facilitators who were eager for more training and more information about this molecule. And so it really inspired me to step into the training space, and I've organized a community that has been excitedly growing quickly to bring together people who are interested in this molecule and serving it in a trauma-informed capacity. And it also inspired me to record this video and, so it's available for people because the original presentations were not recorded, but so many people reached out to me and said, "Can you please send me the recording?" And I said, "I don't have it, but I'll make one for you." So that's what this is. This is a recording, a kind of reenactment, I suppose you could say, of this presentation that I gave a couple weeks ago within the context of the Signal group. But it was so sought after that I wanted to make it more publicly available, and so that's what I'm doing here. And so just to kind of frame it, this episode slash presentation is going to be focused on 5-MeO DMT. It's going to give you some background on the molecule, a little bit of history of it, and it's really going to focus on my process. And most of what I do with this molecule is I do individual retreats, usually full-day retreats. To a lesser extent, I do some couples and some groups as well. But I'm really going to walk you through my entire process as a clinician, as a facilitator of this medicine, what I consider to be best practices. And at the end, I'm going to do a little demo of some technology that I have been working on to help serve this medicine. So let's begin. The first chapter, the first section of this presentation I want to start with is the molecule itself. So 5-MeO DMT, meet the molecule. So what a lot of people don't know about 5-MeO DMT is that it is in the same family as ayahuasca, especially the main psychoactive ingredient of ayahuasca, which is NN-DMT, and also psilocybin. The chemical formula, little known fact, for psilocybin is 4-PO-DMT. We usually don't talk that way. People don't say, I did a 4-PO-DMT journey over the weekend. But we could easily talk that way. It's just we tend to call it mushrooms. 5-MeO-DMT, unless people are talking about the secretion of the Sonoran desert toad and calling it toad or something like that. If it's the synthetic version, we're usually using the chemical name. But it's important to know that all these different molecules, they all essentially, if you look at the chemical structure, they have the same core. So they all are dimethyltryptamine, DMT, including mushrooms, and they all belong to this tryptamine family. And the history of 5-MeO DMT, just briefly, it's important to acknowledge that it does actually have an indigenous historical usage. A lot of people don't know that. It's often associated with this guy, Ken Nelson, who was this kind of psychonaut experimenter who supposedly first smoked the secretion of the Sonoran desert toad sometime in the 80s and then published a pamphlet about it. And then it kind of blew up, and obviously there's been more interest both in the synthetic and in the bufo molecule since then. But before that ever happened, there was actually a history of indigenous usage. And we don't have, as far as I know, I've looked into this, historical or archaeological records that document an indigenous usage of bufo per se. That's not to say it didn't happen. It's just I haven't come across any specific evidence to indicate that there has been historical indigenous usage of bufo per se. But 5-MeO DMT in a different form definitely has archaeological evidence. Specifically, there's a seed called Anodonanthera peregrina It turns out 5-MeO-DMT, not only does it occur in the toads, it also occurs in some plants, even some mushrooms, even in the human body. So there's many different natural sources of it. And the seed, you can grind it down into a snuff. It's called yopo. And I came across in my research on this, there was a site in Chile where there were found some paraphernalia basically for using snuff. And when they analyzed the snuff paraphernalia, they found traces of this Anodonanthera peregrina. And this was dated to be approximately around like 1200 or so years old in carbon dating. So there's obviously a long history of the use of this molecule as a snuff. And I do think it's important to acknowledge that. So I personally, in my practice, use the synthetic form. And there are a few reasons for that. So practitioners tend to divide between those who serve bufo, those who serve synthetic, which is also called jaguar, and then there are those who serve both. The reason I tend to serve the synthetic form is that the bufo, it does contain the same active ingredient. However, the dosing can be challenging because you don't actually know how many milligrams are in any given crystal of bufo. And so there's a little bit of guesswork involved. You can kind of eyeball it and give somebody one little crystal or a couple of crystals or three, just kind of however much you think they need, but you don't actually know how many milligrams of 5-MeO-DMT you're giving them. And so I like the synthetic form because when I measure my medicine, I can really do that down to the milligram. There's still some play in terms of dosing variables, how long the vaporizer is working and how long someone's inhaling and things like that. And so you always have to get a baseline, but I do think there is a greater level of precision with the synthetic. The other consideration is health. The bufo secretion or venom or toxin, people have different words and different feelings about those words. But the point is, it is a predator defense. So it's designed to incapacitate a predator. And so there are a lot of other molecules in the secretion which aren't necessarily that healthy. For example, cardiac glycosides, which tend to have a vasoconstrictive or kind of hypertensive effect. And so when it comes to safety, I find in my work that the synthetic molecule definitely takes precedence over the bufo. So that's why I use it. And then there's also the ecological component as well. So this over-harvesting of bufo has disrupted the ecology of the bufo alvarius toads. And so it's important to name that. So when we're comparing 5-MeO-DMT to the other tryptamines, let's talk about the pharmacology. The thing that makes 5-MeO-DMT unique is that it targets not just the 5-HT2A receptor, but also the 5-HT1A receptor. If you haven't heard of these receptors, these are both serotonin receptors, and most classic psychedelics and all the members of the tryptamine family, including 5-MeO-DMT, target 5-HT2A, which is more associated with some of the trippy, psychedelic, mystical kind of effects that many people are familiar with. 5-MeO-DMT is the only tryptamine that also targets the 5-HT1A receptor. It has a strong affinity for that receptor. And that's the receptor that's often targeted by SSRI. So it's associated with antidepressant effects, anxiolytic effects, as well as a sense of surrender and presence and getting into your body and things like that. And so that explains some of the unique subjective effects of 5-MeO-DMT, which make it different within its position in this family of tryptamines. And to get a little deeper into that, so there's sort of a sliding scale of effects, I would say, with 5-MeO-DMT that start at a low dose where it sort of mimics the experience of a non-dual meditation. And there's actually good evidence of this. There was a recent study that came out from Chris Timmerman and some other colleagues. I think it's just in preprint right now, but it should be published sometime soon. And it showed that a longtime non-dual meditator, I believe it was a Tibetan Lama, they hooked up an EEG rig, and when he did a low dose of 5-MeO-DMT, his brain waves were very, very similar to when he was doing his non-dual meditation. So it seems to naturally induce these kind of meditative states. And then if you dose a little higher, I would say in the kind of low to moderate zone, it tends to induce a somatic trauma release. I often tell my clients that low to moderate dose 5-MeO-DMT is kind of like a deep tissue massage for your nervous system and your psyche. It tends to find whatever is in you that is tight or contracted or energetically stuck, and it releases that. And that can be very relaxing. It can be very painful. It can be very cathartic. It can be all across the board. And then finally, at the deepest doses of 5-MeO-DMT, we have these powerful experiences of what you might call unity consciousness, ego death. It's sometimes called the full release. I don't necessarily mean to imply that it's a singular experience. It's kind of like a genre of experience, because I've seen different clients over the years have many different versions of this. But there seems to be some pattern in that there is a falling away of a lot of reference points of self and other, self and world, up and down, north and south, time and space. And there can just be this kind of ecstatic experience of oneness and a kind of fractal energy field. So moving on, I want to, now that I've introduced the molecule itself, talk about my own process and how I work. And I want to start with safety screening, which is super important for this powerful medicine. And the way that I screen is when people reach out to me on my website, I send them a form, and then I examine that very carefully. And I also meet with them for a 50-minute session together to go over all these points and make sure this is a good fit for them. So I have certain rule outs that I'm looking for in my criteria. Some of these are going to be pretty universal across the board. Some of these will vary practitioner to practitioner. The first one I look at is any kind of schizophrenia spectrum. Personal history of that, or family history of that as well. That's definitely a hard to rule out. In my practice, if somebody has active symptoms that meet DSM-5 TR, that's just the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, in case you don't know what that is. Criteria for PTSD, and I'm talking about things like frequent nightmares, hypervigilance, hyperarousal, intrusive thoughts, these sorts of things. I absolutely do treat trauma in my practice. That's one of the main things that I treat. However, I've found that if somebody is in that very, very active state of PTSD, and it's a presentation I'm very familiar with because I used to work in the VA in a PTSD outpatient clinic, treating veterans of Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, I believe, OEF. Might be getting that slightly wrong. It's been a while, but yeah, Afghanistan and Iraq veterans that, like that presentation, there's so much energy in the body. There's so much hyper arousal already that I find adding more energy into the system is probably not indicated at that time. And that is better. I would refer somebody like that to a trauma-focused psychotherapist practicing EMDR or prolonged exposure, or one of these evidence-based trauma-focused practices, with the goal of getting the symptomology down to a manageable level so that they are more ready then to approach a medicine like 5-MeO-DMT. Some people don't work that way. There are some providers who would treat a client like that, and I think they would just start very slowly and very cautiously and titrate. Heart conditions are definitely a rule out for me. It depends on the severity, and I have coordinated with people's cardiologists and also with my medical consultant, Dr. Ben Malcolm, on this. But yeah, generally speaking, if there are any concerns, I'm going to ask somebody to undergo a stress test and then look at those results with Dr. Malcolm, and we'll make sure that it's going to be a good fit for you. Because when you take the medicine, it's not super cardiac intensive, but your blood pressure can increase, your heart rate can increase, and it can kind of be like the equivalent of getting on a treadmill and going on a, getting a 10-minute jog in or something like that, or 15-minute jog. And so if you can handle that, you're probably going to be fine. But if there are any doubts, then yeah, you need to get screened. You need to get tested. Let's talk about personality disorders. So with 5-MeO-DMT, this is true of any psychedelic, narcissistic personality disorder can be a concern, because if somebody's ego is already very inflated, 5-MeO-DMT can potentially increase that. It can dissolve the boundary between self and other, self and world. Sometimes there can be this subjective experience of oneself becoming everything if that boundary softens. And if narcissism is already in the mix, it can actually exacerbate it. So there are cases of people who have done 5-MeO-DMT and then acquire a certain narcissistic God complex, you could say, and that can be very dangerous. Sometimes people like that go on to become charismatic guides and almost cult-like figures. and there have been cases of abuse. And so it is, yeah, it's definitely you're playing with fire if you're mixing psychedelics and NPD, in my opinion. The other personality disorder that I look for is, and I want to speak sensitively to this, it's traditionally called borderline personality disorder. More recently, the language has been acknowledging the traumatic origins of that presentation, and so we call it CPTSD, or complex trauma, or complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And yes, the old diagnosis of BPD, or borderline personality disorder, tends to hold a kind of stigmatizing quality to it, and it also has been disproportionately applied to women, almost like a character flaw or personality flaw, so it has a sexist history to it. So I try to steer away from that particular language and talk about trauma. But regardless, I have found that folks who meet those criteria or self-identify as having that kind of presentation, that I just, don't have the specialization. I don't have the specialized training, and I have not worked effectively with them. So I tend to refer those folks to other providers who do have that specialty. And there are evidence-based protocols, such as dialectical behavioral therapy, which would be ideal for somebody like that. Maybe a group or an individual protocol of DBT first, before working with 5, would probably be a best practice. Suicidality is definitely a rule out for me. If somebody's at that high level of risk, I certainly don't want to destabilize them any further. And then there are medication interactions that I'm looking for. The number one rule out is monoamine oxidase inhibitors, MAOIs. Fortunately, not that many people are on those these days, but you do want to look out for it. And the other one I look for is SSRIs. So SSRIs, we used to think that they cause serotonin syndrome with psychedelics. It seems to be the latest research that is showing that actually it's more like a blunting effect that happens. So if somebody's on SSRIs, it's not a rule out. I just work with them to figure out what's the best plan. And I often refer them to Dr. Ben Malcolm, who again is my medical consultant. And I want to put in a plug for him because he's amazing. He's a genius. If you have any pharmaceutical psychedelic questions, he is the go-to person in the world as far as I'm concerned. So please, visit his site, spiritpharmacist.com, I believe is the address. And he's great. So we'll work together with him. And what that looks like is perhaps stepping down off the SSRIs with the coordination with the person's prescriber. If for some reason that's too difficult for my client, then we can get creative and see, what's the minimum amount of skipping that you can do. Maybe, can you skip 3 days in advance, potentially, without any kind of side effects? Or can you skip 1 day, just the day of the retreat? So anything we can do to reverse, or reduce, I should say, the competition between 5-MeO-DMT and the SSRI, especially on the 5-HT1A receptor, that's going to produce better effects and require less medicine. And you're kind of, working, not working upstream, swimming upstream, I should say, with the medicine, because sometimes I've encountered this, and people in my community have as well. When somebody has the SSRI in the mix, it feels like you're fighting against something, and it just makes it harder for people to break through and requires a lot more medicine, and can be frustrating. Okay, so I've talked about screening. Now what I want to do is give an overview of my preparation and integration protocol. So in my practice, what I usually do with people is I have them do a minimum of 3 preparatory sessions before the retreat. And these are going to be over Zoom, typically. And then I always do 1 post-integration session afterwards. So a bare minimum of 4 sessions. There are a lot of providers out there who do kind of like a 1-on-1, or it might just be an initial meet and greet consultation, and then they're doing 1 afterwards. I personally, in my practice, find that insufficient. I think this molecule is so incredibly powerful. And so I think more preparation is required to really adequately equip someone to work through this process. To give you a rundown of the topics of these sessions, the first session is pretty similar to what we'd call in social work a biopsychosocial assessment. And so, I'm also a psychotherapist, licensed clinical social worker. So that's usually what I do with people. And I have a pretty extensive questionnaire, and we go through all these different domains of your life. And we're also talking about your traumas and your history, and also your goals and intentions. And my goal is really just to get to know you as well as I can, so that we can build trust and rapport and the therapeutic alliance. Then we get into session 2, which is a deep dive into safety, logistics, and what to expect in the retreat. And this is a big informed consent piece where I go over with my clients everything you could possibly imagine about how to prepare and also what might unfold during the retreat so that there are as few surprises as possible. And I try to leave no stone unturned. I present every scenario I've ever seen and different possibilities, recognizing that may not happen to the person, but I'd rather have them know in advance what might happen so they're psychologically and practically prepared for that. And then in session 3, we kind of get past the checking the boxes and the safety and the screening, and we're getting into now more experiential preparation. So in my practice, I like to tell my clients that there are 2 essential skills that I like to impart with 5-MeO-DMT. And the first skill is what I would call Vipassana. So if you haven't heard that term, Vipassana is a style of meditation that comes out of the Theravada Buddhist tradition. And there's many ways to practice Vipassana, but what I find particularly powerful is the fine-grained, mindful noticing of body sensations, especially body sensations associated with distressing emotions. So I have this meditation I call the hot stove meditation, where I actually, with consent, of course, and preparation, I invite clients to bring to mind and to body, you could say, something challenging, something that's bothering them, something from the past, some anxiety about the future. And then we spend time in meditation really noticing the somatic signature and the energetic signature of that experience. And the reason I think this is a great preparation for 5-MeO is because the low to moderate doses, as I've mentioned, of 5-MeO tend to really shine a light on physiological distress and physiological manifestations of trauma. And so having the ability to summon that and then notice how your body and mind might want to dissociate or check out or avoid or protect from that feeling, and then turning around and approach and coming in and being with it, I find that's a very, very powerful skill. I call it the hot stove because it's kind of like keeping your hand on a hot stove. It feels very counterintuitive to the nervous system because the hand wants to pull away. But actually, if we stay with it, something very powerful can happen as you realize your capacity for equanimity and realize that your nervous system has a natural process and flow of releasing trauma. So that is my 1, 2, 3 preparation sessions. There are 2 optional add-ons in my practice which get more into non-duality per se. I mentioned non-duality earlier. I want to define that a little more clearly. So when we're talking about non-duality, the word not means not two, and it's usually referring to a softening or a falling away of the subjective boundaries between self and other or self and world. Classically, we might call this something like an awakening type experience or a non-dual awareness opening or something like that. And this is something that can absolutely happen in the context of a 5-MeO-DMT retreat, especially as we get into the deeper, more mystical doses. And it can be very ecstatic and enlivening and beautiful, and can also be quite terrifying. And there can be a dark night of the soul on the way there as we're titrating. And so I find that helping people to do non-dual preparatory meditations in advance helps them to experience and dip a toe in or a whole body in the phenomenology of non-duality, even without any of the medicine, to kind of simulate it so that when the medicine comes on, there's a feeling of familiarity, a feeling of safety there, and it's easier to drop in. So I have a couple of different sessions that people can add on. One I call floating in space, which is mostly about dissolving the boundary in consciousness between the body and everything else. And then Ocean of Love takes that deeper and dissolves the boundary between, or it dissolves that body boundary, right? So it's like, actually, I think let me say this in reverse. Floating in space is dissolving all boundaries except for the body boundary. There we go. I was getting ahead of myself. The Ocean of Love is dissolving the boundary between the body and not the body. And so the floating in space is there's a perception of being centered in the body and the self being grounded there, but letting go of everything else. But then as we get deeper, we dissolve that boundary as well. So there is this kind of oceanic continuum of consciousness. Okay, I want to talk about informed consent. So this is a preview, a window into part of session 2. Remember I talked about that preparatory session about safety, logistics, informed consent. So I have a long list of things I go over with people. This is a shortened version of it, just lifting up a few highlights. And basically, these are things I go over with people to let them know this is something that might happen to you. And let's talk about how that unfolds and how to prepare so you know what to expect. So, of course, this is a vasoconstrictive psychedelic. And so there is an increase in blood pressure and heart rate. That's pretty true across the board for all of the tryptamines. There is the possibility of purging, meaning vomiting. And because of that, I do have a fasting protocol that I put in place. And what that looks like is 6 hours no food and 1 hour no liquids before serving. I found that when people abide by that protocol, it's very rare that they do purge. And if they do, it's more energetic and there's very little actual volume coming out, maybe a little bit of saliva, a little bit of liquid from the stomach, but nothing too volcanic or messy, which makes the day easier for everybody. And it's okay if it happens. I've definitely cleaned up a lot of messes before, but yeah, as soon as I instituted this protocol, which I put in place a couple of years ago, yeah, it's been very, very clean and smooth as far as that goes. Of course, this is a psychedelic, so you might experience perceptual distortions, and you might experience, especially the deeper doses, a sense of your personhood or reality coming apart at the seams or distortions of reality. Trauma flashbacks can absolutely happen. And finally, this is a very, or second to last, this is a very important topic, is that there can be an arising of energy that I would describe as sensual or possibly even sexual. So the sensual energy, there's something very innocent and primal, almost Edenic about it. People will remove their clothes and just kind of be moving around, feeling their skin. And there's a sense of almost being just born, like a sense of pristine connection to your senses. And sometimes the energy can get quite sexual. And I've had a number of clients who have, removed their clothes and started touching themselves, masturbating, moaning, being aroused in different ways. And so all of this is a beautiful expression of the human spectrum of energy, right? And it's just like, it's so rare as a human being to have this kind of magical space. It's actually just a foam mattress on the floor in the serving area. But that space I think of as this magic circle where you can do literally anything. And as long as you're not hurting yourself or hurting me, or there's no inappropriate contact between us, then everything is permitted, permitted without shame, without judgment. And so if somebody needs to take their clothes off or moan or have an orgasm or masturbate or whatever, that is all part of what's possible for them. And that can be very healing, especially when there's been sexual traumatization or just kind of disconnect from your body or from your sexuality. And of course, given the sensitive nature of that kind of energy, I do spend a lot of time with my clients talking over with them informed consent, different possibilities, and ways that can feel really supportive and really safe, especially if someone's had trauma. So just as an example, if someone's removing their clothes, I always have a blanket handy. If they feel like they need privacy, I can provide that to them to drape over themselves. And I'm very clear with my clients that I will not engage with you in a sexual or sensual way. And I do have to say that because there's something about this medicine where when you're on it temporarily, sometimes you can feel a sense of social taboos just disappearing and dissolving, and your heart can just be full of love. And I've had more than one client over the years try to engage me and ask me for things like, can I stroke your beard, or can I cuddle with you when the person is already naked and things like that. And so it's good to come back to these boundaries and say to them, no, I'm not going to engage with you. I'm just going to stay here on the couch, but here's a pillow to cuddle, or here's a blanket. And that works well to keep everything really safe. And it's so important to maintain these boundaries because, of course, we have seen, this is true of any field, but psychedelic facilitation is no exception, that there have been many cases of sexual abuse. There have been guides who have abused clients, and when they are abusing clients who are under the influence of the medicine, I think that is particularly damaging, particularly re-traumatizing, and can really leave some lasting psychological scars. And so I really, I don't want to have the pendulum swing the other way and be prudish about it and say, okay, we're not going to have anything sexual come up in medicine, because that's not honoring that part of our humanity. Also, it's just not realistic. The medicine is going to unearth whatever it's going to unearth, and the person's going to do whatever they're going to do. The point is, do we have consent? Do we have a safe container? And are my boundaries as the provider really clear and impeccable so that I'm always bearing witness and I'm not going to engage or re-traumatize my clients in any kind of way? So far, I've been talking about the importance of boundaries with touch, and I also want to name how powerful and healing touch can be when used appropriately. And I do have something I call my supportive touch protocol, which are ways that I offer touch that can be supportive and grounding in a difficult moment. And most of the time, this looks like holding my client's hand, or sometimes a hand on the shoulder, or there might be other possibilities that the client might request. And we'll just kind of negotiate that as it comes up. For example, I once had a client who experienced a lot of tension in her forehead, and she just wanted me to put my palm on her forehead, and that was just really soothing for her. I'm a very huggy person, so with my clients' permission, I usually give them a hug when I see them at the door and a hug on the way out. And if any point in the retreat day they feel like they want a supportive hug, that is, of course, welcome. And as I mentioned, if they're going through a challenging experience, I'm available to hold their hand. And we talk through what that looks like in terms of consent and in terms of how to request that. So what I tell my clients is you can always request it verbally. If you're in a pre-verbal state, you can just extend your hand and kind of pump your hand, your palm, and I'll know that you're looking for me to hold your hand. And there might be situations where I perceive you to be in such a regressed, pre-verbal, or challenging state that I think perhaps you might need some supportive touch, but you might not be in a position to request it. And so in that case, I will initiate the request by saying, would you like some supportive touch right now? Or would you like me to hold your hand? This happens more rarely, but there are situations where I might offer that and then not get a response, and my client is just in an obvious state of incredible distress, and they're thrashing and they're screaming and they're just seem extremely agitated, and potentially are even getting close to the edge of the mattress, and it's getting a little bit dangerous in terms of making sure that they're physically safe, they're not going to roll off and bump their head or something like that. So in situations like that where I'm not getting the verbal response, I sometimes will just hold the client's hand, and I do make sure to talk that through with people in advance and tell them there might be rare situations where I might just intervene with some supportive touch because I can't communicate with you, but because I perceive you to need some grounding. And I find that that is incredibly helpful when people are just really in a deep state of distress or through some kind of dark night of the soul, just feeling the human touch. And sometimes I might say something very gentle, just like whispering, "You're safe, you're safe." And people tell me later, oh, I could hear that coming through, and it just really grounded me in that moment. So I do want to just clarify that touch isn't always about just, caution. There also are these ways that it can be used in a really, really beautiful way, in a mindful way with consent that is supportive. The last part of informed consent that I let people know about are what I call reactivations, as how they're commonly known. And what's also called night school. So reactivations are ways that the energy of the medicine can return again. It can come back, and that might be a day later, it might be a month later, it might be years later in some cases. Usually most reactivations are happening, I would say, within a week time frame after the retreat, and it often just looks like some element of the medicine is returning. It might feel like you've actually had a small dose of it or a moderate dose, or in my case, a large dose. The next day when I first had my 5-MeO, I did some breath work and I had a full release just on the breath work. So it all kind of depends on what you're doing, and there are possible triggers to it. If you're listening to music from your retreat, if you're doing other spiritual practices, it's more likely to happen. And I don't want to describe it like some kind of side effect to be concerned about, because actually I think it's a beautiful process of the medicine integrating. It's not a bug, it's a feature of the process. It's just important to know about it so that you're not concerned or think something is awry if you're feeling all this energy in your body or you're feeling more open. Night school just refers to reactivations that happen at night. So it's pretty common, I would say at least 50% of my clients at night, they might have wild dreams. They might revisit in their dreams some of these experiences. They might have full releases in their dreams and so forth. It usually resolves within a day or two. In rare cases, I've had people have a week or two where the sleep is a bit disrupted. So it's very important to know. And there are ways to mitigate that if it does become a challenge for the person in terms of getting rest. And the main one I would say is magnesium threonate is an excellent supplement to take. It's very calming, and it just helps you to get sleep even as these reactivations might be arising. All right, so let's get down to business talking about the retreat itself. I've been talking about all this preparation. So what does it actually look like to work with me for a full day retreat, which is my most common format? So I'll give you a full rundown of this. So at 8 a.m., I will arrive at the property that we've agreed upon to meet, and we do some preparatory work. That's mostly me setting up the space, and we'll do some work around intentions. I'll guide you on some meditation, mostly, yeah, that kind of somatic and also non-dual meditation. And then from 9 to noon, we start off with the Stepwise vaporization protocol. Stepwise is it's become a technical term. It was originated by a couple of folks who started a training in the Bay Area that I had the privilege of attending. And the heart of it is doing these trauma-informed titrations of the vaporized medicine. And usually it's done in vape pen format. I have a slightly different piece of technology that I'll show you at the end of this presentation. But the point is, we are not giving somebody a really high bungee jump dose at the beginning. We are starting off with small doses and working our way at their own pace up to potentially full release territory. Then at noon, there is a rest period, and that's usually a time for both me and my client to take a nap and just rest and restore ourselves. And then around 1, we start in again with a different route of administration. And I like to refer to these different routes as extended release or XR. I'm kind of borrowing that from the pharmaceutical world, but I think it's a nice abbreviation to describe just this different way of working with the medicine. Extended release, meaning the come up is longer. Instead of instantaneous, it's more like 5 or 10 minutes. And the duration of it is also longer, so it might be closer to 30 to 60 minutes. There are many different extended release formats, including insufflation, including intramuscular injection. I personally like to work with rectal and also subcutaneous. When I say rectal, I like to quickly clarify that it is self-administered. So I have a kit and I show you how to do it. I leave the room, and then the client will administer, and then when they're ready, then they're dressed again. I'll come back in the room. So it's very discreet and private and respectful in that way. I like to lead with rectal because I figure anytime I can not have to pierce somebody's skin, there's just a little lower level of risk there. Also, some people have hangups about needles, and so I want to be sensitive to that. Other people have no hangups about needles, and they have hangups about the rectum, so they'd rather go with the sub-Q, as it's abbreviated. So I think it's nice to offer both options. The rectal also, I find, it doesn't necessarily work for everybody. So probably about 5 to 10% of people just don't absorb that way. I'm not sure why, but it's just not effective. And so the subcutaneous is a nice backup. Both of them offer this slower come up and this longer lasting experience. And I would say what distinguishes the rectal as unique from subcutaneous is it can potentially target specifically the pelvic floor, or the root chakra, as it's sometimes called. So if a client of mine has had sexual trauma, and especially if they are aware of having tightness or pain in their pelvic floor, or forms of sexual dysfunction or urological dysfunction, sometimes the rectal route of administration is exactly what they need. That was true for me personally, and that's why I'm a big fan of it. I found it incredibly healing. And if it doesn't work, or the person just has a preference, the subcutaneous is a great backup option. It's a little more bioavailable, very, very, it's a sure shot. It always absorbs. So there's no concern about it not working, which is nice. Yeah. And one last thing I'll say about the extended release formats is that they tend to leave your psychology online more, as distinguished from the vaping. So the vaporized format in the morning, it tends to be this lightning quick, and it just cuts right through your thinking mind and gets you right in your energetic body, which is fantastic. And I think from an integration perspective, it's nice to have both kind of hemispheres, right? This full spectrum kind of approach where you are cutting through the thinking mind, getting into pure energy states, you could say. But then with the rectal, especially if we're dosing it in a more moderate way, which I try not to do high doses because that can be a really overwhelming experience. I'm usually dosing people 10, 15, 20 milligrams at the most. And the reason those numbers are higher than people might be used to for, let's say, freebasing, is that the rectal just isn't as bioavailable. So you tend to need to dose more because it doesn't absorb as efficiently as it does in the lungs. And so yeah, when you're in the rectal or the subcutaneous, the extended release, it feels like there's more spaciousness to and slowness to really bring in different elements of your psychology, to reflectively bring in elements of your past or of your relationships or of your career or things like that. So there's a kind of processing that can happen there that feels somewhat reminiscent more of ayahuasca or of mushrooms, that kind of pace. And then towards the end of the day, starting around 3 o'clock, that's when we start to wind down. And I prepare some refreshments for my clients, and we talk about integration, we talk about their experience, we talk about aftercare, we talk about best practices for how to work with energy that might be coming up in the days and weeks that go by. And of course, as I mentioned, we also still have one Zoom integration session at least that we'll meet to talk more afterwards. And even then, if that's not sufficient, people can always book more with me. So there's lots of different options for continued integration. And I also have a group as well, an integration group online that people are welcome to join once they've done the individual retreat. So just kind of zooming out for a moment, I feel like I've been getting into the nitty-gritty details, logistics, practicalities, the effects, the different routes of administration. But I like to ask the question, what are we really talking about here with 5-MeO-DMT? What do I see as the arc of the work, both in the short term and the long term? What do I see it as doing? I love the word connection, and I think about the connective tissue, to use a kind of fascia body metaphor, of the work. And so what do I see as its role as a healing medicine? I think it helps you connect with your body, first of all, especially the energy in your body, especially your distressing emotions that you've been avoiding, and really see that energy as like music, as something to be listened to, not as a problem to be solved. It helps you connect to awareness. That's kind of capital A awareness in the non-dual meditative sense. Or you could also just replace that with subjectivity, with your senses, with the field of consciousness in that non-dual way. It also helps you connect with the moment. And this is important because you can have a peak experience on 5-MeO-DMT, but then does that just persist as a memory that you're coming back to as a reference point? Or has something shifted in your psychology and in your neurology such that you're actually experiencing more vividness or more connection or more spaciousness in the moment? So it's actually plugging into your life, and that's a big part of integration. You could also add into here, if I wanted to expand this a little bit, connection to others, right? So this is more of like a personal lens, but all of these things are connected, right? So when you're more spacious and plugged into your own body sensations, and you have more capacity for your own feelings, you also have more capacity in relationships as well. So I want to name that too in the relational kind of dimension or space of this. Unjourneying is the name of course, my channel here and my practice. And the reason I'm putting this here is because there seems to be, for some clients, and this is also true for me, a kind of stage of working with this medicine integratively. It takes its inspiration from the story of Neem Karoli Baba, who supposedly was given LSD by Ram Dass and did not have any psychoactive experience to speak of. And I found that there's something interesting with 5-MeO-DMT and the other tryptamines as well, where when you've been practicing for a while, connecting with your body, connecting with awareness, connecting to the moment, the medicine seems to have less and less of an effect, presumably because your mind has become more spacious, more open, more present. And so initially, I know when I did this medicine, it felt like my mind was very, very tight and small, and it felt like a demolition crew coming in and just blowing it up and expanding it. But then over time, I found that my mind felt more as a default state, just more open and spacious and present. And so the energy of the medicine would just kind of come through like waves. I might feel some of the physical effects, like my heart rate increasing, but there didn't seem to be as much of a journey experience of going elsewhere, going into the cosmos, or exploding into the stars, or something like that. And so I started to call this approach Unjourneying. And it's not something that may be for everyone, but for those who are interested, I find it's a really helpful, I would say like a later stage way of working with the medicine. And when I work with clients who are interested in that particular phase of work, there are different ways, different postures, different protocols that we use to work with 5-MeO. Just to give you a little example of that, when you take the medicine, instead of lying down with your eyes closed, you might sit up and perhaps even, there's certain ways I have people like move their fingers or move their toes or things like that, where instead of your extremities just dissolving and then your body just disappearing into the wave of consciousness, there's a sense of, let me try to surf this medicine and remain actually embodied, even at very high doses. I found that to be a very interesting practice. So there's all sorts of ways to work with it. I don't recommend that initially, but I just like to name that as a way where all of these things come together, where I feel like your consciousness is just getting habituated through the medicine to the point where the medicine is becoming almost kind of superfluous, because you are connected to your body, you are connected to awareness, you are connected to the moment. And so the medicine, I guess it's sort of lit up your endogenous, channels of the 5-MeO, and it's become less relevant for you. All right, so kind of wrapping up this part of the presentation. I just wanted to name that if people want to work with me, of course they can go to my website and book a free session there. I want to move on now to the kind of finale of this presentation, which are the just a little demo of some of the pieces of serving elements and technology that we have here. Okay, so this is a syringe that we would use for subcutaneous injection. It's an insulin syringe. And then this is a different syringe that we would use for the rectal. So it's just a simple blunt-tipped, there's no needle. This is a, what do they call this? Lure slip tip is technically what it's called. And as you might see, I've put a little disc there to mark the insertion depth with a little piece of medical tape. And so my clients know exactly how far to insert it, and that just makes it really easy. And you can see it's not a very large diameter, so it's quite painless and easy to insert. And now what I want to do to conclude here is just show you this little piece of technology that I've been working on. So the name of this is the Hourglass, right? You can see probably why I call it that, because it looks like an hourglass. And what I found over the years with my clients is that one of the big barriers, put this down for a second while I explain this, is respiratory sensitivity. So when people use the vape pens, you have to kind of be inhaling as the vape pen is generating the vapor, right? And so that's usually at least like a 5-second inhale, potentially as long as a 10-second inhale. And so that is a longer kind of exposure time for the lungs. And I also found that because it's, the atomizer is so close to the mouth, that could also be very hot vapor. And finally, there are usually mixed in with these vape cartridges some liquid carriers. They might be things like propylene glycol or vegetable glycerin, and that is not ideal for everybody's lungs. So some people have reactions to those. And so I found that there were a portion of my clientele who just found the medicine to be too irritating, and they would cough, and it was just break my heart because we're trying to go deep with this medicine and there's just a respiratory barrier. And so I kept working and tinkering around and trying different things to try to solve this, and this is the culmination of that. So this device here, the Hourglass. So let me take you through it and explain, and then I can do a little demo of it. So it's essentially a kind of wooden framework or cage within which there are two different glass bulbs. They're actually glass bubblers, globe bubblers as they're called. And then there is a device here that plugs into the bulb, the top bulb. So this is called a Hamilton Jetstream Mini. Let me bring this up to the camera so you can see that, by Hamilton Devices. It's a really cool piece of technology because what it does is if you put a vape cartridge in there, it not only does it as a battery, so it activates the vapor by heating it up, but it also has a built-in pump in here, so you don't have to inhale at all. So it actually pumps the vapor autonomously. And the other thing that I've done that's a little different with my vape cartridges is, most of the time, as I mentioned, people put in some kind of liquid carrier, which can be irritating to the lungs. I found that actually what you can do with a vape cartridge is just put the pure molecule in there. So I actually just load the cartridge with crystals, and then I put it in a water bath, sealed up, usually around like 176 Fahrenheit, I found is a good temperature. And that tends to melt the molecule in there, and then the liquid absorbs into the core. And then as long as I preheat the cartridge, I can just give people pure molecule from this is a C-cell Cara vape cart, and there's no liquid carrier required, which is just fantastic for people with sensitive lungs. So that's been a nice hack that has been really effective. And so the way that this this Hourglass works is I plug the cartridge here, or I mean the mini Jetstream Mini here. And then what I do is I press the fire button and I am injecting vapor into this upper cartridge. And the way that I titrate the dose is by time. So I use a millisecond timer, and I usually start with 1 second. This is 100% concentrated vapor, right? So I have to be careful to titrate by counting carefully. So usually 1 second, the second dose might be 1.5 seconds or 2 seconds, and usually going up in half-second or full-second increments. So I inject the vapor into this top bulb here, and there's a ball valve here in the center, which I'm going to go ahead and put in the closed position. Let me turn this around so you can see the valve there. So that's a closed position. And so what that means is I can preload the entire dose into this upper bulb. And remember I said earlier how when people would vaporize with the vape pens, there's more lung exposure time because they have to be inhaling as the vapor is generated. In this case, the entire dose is preloaded into here before the person even has to inhale at all because the valve is closed. So the dose just remains in this upper bulb. And then whenever the person's ready, they then are going to draw. I'm going to put this in the open position, and then they're going to draw on this whip tube, and the vapor pathway goes down through the ball valve and into the bubbler. And there's a little bit of water in there, which I'll put in a second. And then so the vapor is then it's filtered, right? It's filtered and it's cooler, and because the vapor pathway goes all the way to the whip tube, by the time it gets to them, not only has it gone through this bubble filter, but also just the length of the whip tube also cools it down as well. So all in all, this combination of pure molecule, no carrier, preloading into here, using the bubbler, all those work together to create just a significantly smoother respiratory experience, and I found it to be really effective. So are you ready to have me demonstrate this? All right, so let's do this. So the first thing I need to do is put a little bit of water in the bottom. So bear with me a second. And I'm going to take the whip tube out for this demonstration because I find that it's going to be easier to see on the frame. So let's pour a little bit of water in here. Okay, that should be sufficient. All right, and first thing I'm going to do is take my Jetstream Mini, and I'm going to press it 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. See how that light is lighting up? So now this is locked and loaded, ready to go. What I'm going to do for this demonstration, so that you can see the vapor clearly, is I'm going to actually move my screen, the back of my screen, up in front of the camera. So bear with me a second. So that way you have a nice black background to actually see the Hourglass at work. And so I'm holding up the Hourglass here. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the Hamilton Jetstream Mini, and I'm going to insert that into the upper bulb, and making sure the valve is in the closed position. And now watch the bulb carefully, and as I turn this on, you're going to see the vapor coming into there. So 1, 2, 3, here we go. You can see the vapor pumping in, see it getting nice and cloudy. Okay, great. And now I'm going to slide this out. Usually the person would be inhaling by now, but for demonstration purposes, I'm just sliding this out. And I'm going to attach in its place a air compressor so that we can see this at work. And I'm going to open the valve just slightly so we can see the vapor. And then let's move now onto the lower bulb. And I want you to look at the lower bulb, look at the water, and look at the spout coming out. And you should see it bubbling, and you should see the vapor coming out. So 3, 2, 1. There we go. Okay, so as you can see, the vapor pathway took the vapor from the upper bulb through to the lower bulb, filtered it, and went out. Usually we go through the whip tube into the person's mouth. So that concludes my demo. Okay, so that wraps up our presentation. Thank you so much for watching. And for those of you just listening to this on a podcast format, Apologize for the lack of visuals, but I would encourage you to get on YouTube and see it there. Or if you're on Spotify, they have a video format there you can see, so you can get the whole experience. So in conclusion, I just want to say thank you so much for listening to this or watching this, wherever you're getting this. If you like what I'm doing here and would like to support my work, consider liking this and subscribing, and consider giving, if you're on a podcast platform like Apple or Spotify, consider giving this podcast a 5-star rating. It really helps it get to more people. And if you'd like to support my work financially, of course, you can work with me. I am offering coaching, psychotherapy, and also psychedelic retreats as well. You can find out more about that on my website, unjourneying.com, and you can book a free 50-minute consultation with me to discuss what you're interested in. And also, I have a Patreon page as well. The easiest way to find it is just to Google Patreon Unjourneying, and then you'll find different subscription options there with some interesting perks that you might enjoy. And finally, on social media, I'm at Unjourneying on pretty much all the platforms. So whatever your favorite platform is, you can subscribe to me there to get more of my content and videos. So thank you so much. Really appreciate your support.